Hello, welcome to ZIM Capture. I'm inventor Dan Zen. And ZIMJS.com is an open source framework to make interactive media on the HTML canvas using JavaScript and Create.js. In this capture, we're going to take a look at parallax, which is a very cool effect. Now, there's a couple ways we can do parallax. Let's take a look at some examples. On the ZIM site, if we scroll down to where the bits are, down here, here's a couple bits that deal with parallax. So this is a traditional parallax right here where the foreground, that's little Elliot, the foreground is moving faster than the middle ground, which is a snowball, and that's moving faster than the background, and that gives it this illusion of depth. And you can take a look at the code here and see how that is done. Here's another example, scroll parallax effect, and this one is, well, it has sound, so we're going to have to reduce that sound so I can talk over top of it. There we go. Now what we're doing here is we're scrolling, and as we scroll, we're changing the X and Y and the scale of that saucer in certain regions, and same with these things here. So we're also moving the whole window, but we're using the parallax effect to change the dimensions of things and make it look like, oh, that's coming from way far away, and animating it like so. Okay, now this one is a custom input, and we're using the position of the scroll of this ZIM window component as a custom input to the parallax object. Now the parallax comes with, so to speak, a mouse X and a mouse Y, as well as a scroll X and a scroll Y. But that's a scroll X and a scroll Y of the whole window, whereas this is more like how much is this specific smaller window scrolling. So that would be a custom input. Okay, let's see a full window input, shall we? Yeah, that would be good. And that's under the examples here. There's a parallax example. And here we're using now the Windows scroll. So this is scroll Y. And as we scroll, it splits those apart, and take a look at the rings. Isn't that neat? And now it brings in the scale and the alpha of Animate and the backing there. And there we are even scrubbing a sprite. So that's scrubbing a sprite sheet based on how much we've scrolled within a certain region. We bring in the mouse. Now this is mouse parallax, so more like the traditional parallax based on the X and Y of the mouse. Neat, huh? And there's rotation done. And then back up to the top. Now what we do when we hit the top here is we're going to animate the scroll here. And when we animate the scroll, we can do that with just zim.scroll_y and back to 0, like 300,000. No, that would be 30 seconds. 3,000 would be 300,000 is a lot. That would be very slowly back up to the top. 3,000. And then that would animate it up to the top in 3 seconds, which is what's just happened there. Cool, huh? Now, there is another holiday example of scroll as well. Shall we take a look at that? Sure, why not? Where is it? Holiday example. And there's inventor Dan Zen, that's me, and I lose my eyeball. And it says, presents. And what are these things? Oh, they are presents that we can wrap and deliver. We could click this, and it does a little animation, which is really the same animation as, well, what would happen if we just pulled that. So there we are, and we hit deliver, and whoop, it gets ready to deliver into a shrink ray. Wow, and there it goes into the shrink ray. We hit send, and it sends it off to Facebook, and, well, it can if you click these things. And happy sharing, and rotating Dan Zen, and the ZIM parallax, and back up to the top. Pretty cool, huh? So that's, you know, a lot of people have fun with those types of things in parallax. And what we're doing is we're animating things within certain regions. Each of the things that we're animating is called a layer, and we're animating that within certain regions of the scroll by a certain amount. So let's see how we do that. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. All right. It's like this. var parallax is equal to a new zim.parallax. And then we pass it the stage so that we can get the stage width and stage height if we need to. Now, there's a couple other parameters. We can say the damping, so 0.1 is the default. That's how quickly the objects will animate based on the input. So 0.1 is probably what you saw there. 0.01 is really, really slow, and 0.5 is very fast, for instance. Okay, or we can leave that the default with null and then pass in layers. So here's where we would pass in the layers, and it's an array of layer objects, like so. So you can do it this way if you want. You can also, because they're sitting there like that, separate them out on multiple lines, like so. Boop, beep, boop. Like that. And each layer object has certain properties, like what object are we animating? And we would say what object we're animating, etc. Let's see what other things we can put in there, shall we? So just before we go, that's one way of doing it. The other way, which we're actually going to do, is not put any of the layers in there at all, and just go parallax dot add layer each time we want to add a layer, and pass the object in like that. And that's sometimes easier because I'm going to make a loop and add a bunch of layers in a loop now, and we can do that. So let's see what can go into these layers. We'll take a look at the documentation. Docs, 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 and type in para and enter. And there's the stage we were passing in, the damping, the layers. Auto defaults to true. That means it's going to either use mouse X, mouse Y, scroll X, or scroll Y. If you're using anything else as an input or want anything else as an input, you would set auto to false. And then you would, as it says down here in the parameters here, if you set the auto to false, then you must make your own ticker and use a step method and pass in the input. So we'd make our own ticker, we'd say parallax.step, and in the round brackets we would pass the position of, say, a ZIM window or something like that. And the scroll of the ZIM window has a property that you can use. Okay, so here's what the layers can hold. It's an array, as mentioned, of things like, here's one, the object, property X. We're going to change the property X, 200, with an input of scroll Y. Oh, that would be sort of strange. Oh, that was based on the scroll Y. So this is, yes, one of those examples where we're window scrolling. And then we pass in a region between 100 and 300. So between 100 and 300 of the scroll Y, we're going to change the property 200. So we'd move it 200 from wherever it was. The factor of 1 means the same way. Integer was sort of used for scrubbing a sprite sheet, although it's actually not required because sprite sheets will round that for you anyway, or floor it. I'm not sure which one. Okay, so how about here's another example here. This is this time with the mouse X and mouse Y. So here's an example of, we're saying, hey, please animate this object in the X position, make it change by 100. And if we don't put the type of input, so no input in there, then it will assume that you mean the mouse X. And then we'll animate that object's Y property an amount of 50 based on the input of the mouse Y. So this is a kind of thing that we'll be doing. Let's just copy this then. And come on back to here and paste. Oops, I already had the squigglies. That's good. So we're going to make the parallax effect an object called, oh, well, we don't have an object yet. So let's make an object. Just comment that out for now. We'll store a bunch of circles, call them balls. Yes, let's have some balls. Var balls is equal to a new zim dot container. So this will hold all of our balls. We have a dot there. How's my typing today? Ooh, it's after New Year's, you know, like wobble, wobble, wobble. Okay, this container, we'll make it the stage width and the stage height. It'll make us easier to center things inside that container. We will then add it to the stage. So that is, well, we've got a new one. Should I show you? I'm kind of sneaking in here. If we take a look, we are in a fit template, but we are ZIM 4.5.1, which is after 4.5. And after that, we may as well show it here. We've got our balls. We can just say balls dot add to, and round brackets the stage. So the reason why we've added an add to method is that otherwise, like we've been sort of often doing things like ball, we're going to say something like ball dot center on balls. I shouldn't have called balls. Oh boy. Ball dot center on balls. And you see how that works. It's kind of like, it's the same way. We've got balls dot add to the stage. Ball dot center on balls. If we have stage dot add child balls like that, it's in the opposite direction. We're now adding balls to the stage, whereas here we're adding ball to the balls. Like it's the opposite way. So it's just sort of nagged me a little bit over the last little while, or just sort of bothered me. So we'll see how it goes. You can just you don't need both of these. You could do one or the other, but if you're not wanting to center it, which we don't need to, then we should just add it to the stage. And now there's balls.add to stage, like so. Okay, so that's centered there, and now we're going to do some looping. We could do a normal for loop, or we could use a zim.loop like that. If you haven't tried this, you probably should. I've been using it now for a couple of months, and it is easier. It's a lot of fun. So we'll make 10 of these, and we'll call a function. You see, we do this all the time, and in that function, we collect I. This is the format, the same format as how we add event listeners, how we do an interval, etc. Well, aside from the fact it's got a parameter in there. When we do our event listeners, there is a parameter there, like what our event is, for instance, right here. So frame.onReady, call this function. Okay, zim.loop 10 times, call this function 10 times. Basically, that's what it's doing. Each time it calls it, we receive a parameter I. Now, in other words, this is just replacing for var I equals 0 to I is less than 10, I plus plus squiggly, like so. Okay, that I find a bit of a pain in the neck to do each time. This, it's easier for me anyway. Not only that, this is just a normal loop, but the ZIM loop has 4 different modes. It can loop like this up to a number, it can loop through an array, it can loop through an object literal, and it can loop through a container. And each time it gives you right here as the very first thing what you want. If it's an array, like if this were some array, this would give you the element, so this would be the element right here, comma. So that would be the value that is in that array. If it's an object, that would be the object property name and then comma the property value, comma I. If it's a container, this one, if this were some container, balls for instance, then this would give you the ball. So this would give you the child each time. And that just makes it so much easier. You don't have to do all of this stuff and then get child at, and really it's the same thing. There's a couple other nice things about the loop as well. You can reverse it by putting true here, and that will reverse it. You can also pass in parameters that say where it begins and where it ends if you need to, but usually we don't have to do that, and therefore this structure is pretty straightforward. Now, where the heck was I? So we are looping, not through balls, but just 10. We don't even have any balls made. And not that. And there. Okay, so we're looping, and each time we're going to make a ball. Var ball is equal to a new zim.circle. And we can give it a radius of, say, 20 plus 20 times I. So what we're doing here is we're making it start at least 20, and each time the circle gets a little bit bigger. So we're making concentric circles getting bigger. And that is the diameter of the color. We'll just use frame.pink, for instance. So there we have a ball, and we'll add this to the balls. So that is ball dot, we'll center it on the balls. Ball dot center on balls. Bully, 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 boo, bully, booly, booly, boo. All right. Oh, why don't we now? If we were to do that, they'd all kind of sit on top of one another. We wouldn't see them very well. We could see them if you reduce the alpha. Shall we take a look at that? We can say ball dot alpha equals 0.1 or something, equals 0.1. And are we all good? I guess so. Let's take a look at this. Open in a browser. And there they are, and you get that sort of alpha effect, and that might look nice to play around with that if you so desire. But we can also pass in a frame.clear here as to the color, and let's give it, and then frame.pink will now be its stroke, and it will default to 1. We'll bump that up to 2. Frame.clear makes in no fill. If we put in null here for no fill, we don't want fill, we put in null, it will actually make a black circle. It might be something for ZIM to think about whether or not, if when we have an actual stroke in there, if we pass in null, perhaps it should make a clear circle. But at the moment, frame.clear is a shortcut to the string color that would be RGBA, and we would type in, well, it doesn't really matter what we put there, but zeros are nice and short, and then 0 for the alpha. So that's a 0 alpha color, and that's what frame.clear is. It's just a shortcut to that amongst the other colors stored on ZIM frame. Okay, now we won't do anything with the alpha here. We'll add the balls, and we'll take a look at it like so. And there we get the concentric circles as we were talking about. Okay, now let's parallax them. In here we add our layer, so we'll just cut that from there, plop it in here, plop, plop. Parallax.add layer. The object we're going to parallax will be the ball. We'll change its X property. The input will be a default, so we don't even need that if we want. We can keep it there, input X. And how much are we going to change each time? So say if we change 200 each time. Now this isn't going to be terribly exciting, but we'll take a look. Refresh this. So as I move my mouse, it's moving 200. So over here, that's basically 100 to the right of where it was, and over here is 100 to the left of where it was. And that would be the telephone, which says the word assist on it, so I don't think I'm going to answer that. Don't answer the telephone! That should be that. Okay, now what's more exciting though is if we parallax this a slightly different amount for each layer. So let's try that. Hopefully that wasn't you calling me, was it? We noticed in your ZIM Capture that you said this. I was just calling you to ask, did you really mean? That would be funny. And a bit of time travel. Okay, so in here, 200, and now we're going to make each one change a little bit more. How about 50 times I, for instance? So that means the later ones, the ones as I is increasing here, will be moving more than the distant ones, which is basically how parallax works. The ones that are closer to you, and we're assuming that's the bigger ones, which are made later because you see we're getting bigger each time. So the bigger ones are getting made after the smaller ones. The smaller ones are only moving 200 because I will be 0, and then 250, and then etc. But the bigger ones are going to be moving more. So let's see what this looks like. Ooh. Isn't that cool? Like, oh, this is so cool. Now there's no movement in the X and Y. What I like doing with the X and Y is adjusting its scale. Okay, but you can see the parallax effect where the last ones made are moving more than the first one's made. So it looks like they're in the foreground. All right, let's do the X, or the Y, sorry. And that would look like we'll move the ball again. We'll change the Y position and the property, oh, not the Y position. We could do the Y position. Do you want to see that? Mouse.Y. It's roughly the same thing. The only difference is when we do it, refresh here, it moves it based on the Y being at 0 here. So 0 and then half again, like that. So you can see that could be handy for us. Now you can make adjustments to that by, it's sort of a kludge. You got to adjust the registration point of these as you go. But it can be done. You just change the registration point as you're making each ball. You change the registration point in the Y, the reg Y. Okay, but I wanted to do scale here. And Parallax gives you, by the way, a convenience property there, scale. There is no scale property. There's scale X and scale Y properties, which you can do individually if you want. Actually might be kind of cool to see what that looks like. But Parallax, as well as ZIM Animate, will also give you this a scale convenience property. So we're going to do that, and we'll just change the scale 2. So we're going to double it, and that means these things will get bigger, and that will be based on the mouse Y. And as we try it out here, whoop, ooh, zoom, zoom, zoom. So there it is, getting bigger as we approach, and smaller. So, which is kind of cool, huh? All right. Is there any last minute thoughts here? You should definitely pop into the documentation, well, not the documentation, the, what's it called, the code, like the code for those other parallax examples, and see all the little tricks that you can do with ZIM Parallax. But you can see that it's fairly straightforward to adjust things here. Note that we're changing properties. Some other parallax engines, I think I've really only seen one other parallax engine. I built one called Hummingbird back in the Flash days. But I did peek at some HTML, or one HTML parallax engine just briefly, and noticed that was based on the depth. So back in the Flash days, we used to have depth because you could actually set the depth of an object as a Z property. And that kind of makes sense as well. I mean, you could specify, hey, this is at a certain depth, and therefore it will, move it accordingly. But I find this one a little bit handier just to say, hey, what the property is and what will the property change be, and it makes more sense with things like spinning something. So you can use the same type of effect with more than just a depth that we're looking at there. The other thing to note is Parallax is based on each of these objects that we make. Parallax is based on a proportion damp, the ZIM proportion damp class. And indeed, each layer is a ZIM proportion damp object. Oh, one last thing. If we take a look at this, I'll refresh here and watch. My mouse is not inside there, and look at what's happening. The thing sort of seems to go over to the left. That's the position right here at the very left corner, a 0, 0 position. See, I'm at 0, 0 and it hardly moved, right? Okay, so it's sort of defaulting to 0, 0. Now we can fix that if we want, and that is, we've got immediate. As mentioned, it's based on proportion damp, which has a damp object in it, or damp, uses the damp class. The damp class has this thing called immediate, which means it'll start calculating at a certain value. Right now it's starting to calculate at position 0, 0, and that isn't necessarily what we want. So we say with the parallax you can pass in immediate as well, but unfortunately you've got to give an immediate value for each layer. So that looks like this: parallax dot immediate, like that. And inside we need an array that has all of the immediate values. So if we take a look at the documentation here, Parallax, and scroll down, here's our method, immediate, and it receives an array, sets the target value for each layer object. Okay, so if we pop on back here, we need to make this array for each layer, which isn't too difficult. It's a bit of a pain. Var starts is equal to an empty array at the moment. And then each time we're going to add, we've just made 2 layers. We could do it one under the other. We could say starts.push the starting value. And that is, the starting value for the x here is going to be ball.x. Okay, so we've just put the ball.x in there, and then we can copy this, paste it here, and this starting value is the scale, and we might want them all to be 1 in the middle. Okay, so now we don't pass in the empty array there, we pass in the array starts, like so. Okay, now they'll all start there for the damping. That's great. They all start there, and we take a look here and we go, we refresh. Do you see what happened? Son of a gun. They all start in the middle, but they immediately damp to the left because it's picking up, if you aren't in the screen with your mouse, it assumes your mouse X and mouse Y are at 0, 0. So it's a little bit different than before. Before it was starting, it looked like this right to start. Okay, because the damping was at 0, 0 and the mouse position was at 0, 0, and that's how it began. Now it's starting where we want, like that roughly, but it's damping to 0, 0. So the way I've sort of gotten around this is said, hey, don't even start the parallax until the mouse is in the screen. All right, and that might look like this. There is no way to actually turn this parallax off. One way would be don't build it until the mouse moves. It's pretty easy to capture a mouse move. It just looks like this. Stage dot on mouse. We better do stage mouse move. This will capture mouse movement on the stage anywhere. Mouse move just captures it when it's on something that is actually on the stage. Comma, we run this function. And in here, this is where we'd be ready to start because we've moved the mouse. But we don't want to make this function run every time we move the mouse. So create.js with its event model gives us a pass in null here, that's the scope or something. And then here is run it only once, true. That's handy to know. So runs once, like that. So this will run only once. Let's just check it. Zog mouse, like so. So we save that up, we pop in here, we refresh, I open up the console. No mouse yet, and I watch. No mouse still, even though I'm on the window. And are you ready? Boop, mouse, just once. Okay, just watch that. If you didn't do this part, this is very important because you definitely do not want to be, look at that, mouse, 70, 80, 100. You do not want to be starting this thing or setting this thing 500 times in, a couple seconds, all right? So you want to make sure that this runs only once. You can also remove the event listener a couple different ways there, but this is probably the easiest. Okay, great. So we've captured the fact that we've done a mouse. Now, if we wanted to, we could just move this whole thing into there, and then we know we've got the mouse. Problem is this whole thing is actually making our circles, so we wouldn't even see any circles. We could split that up. We could make the circles, and then separately inside of here, we could add the layers. Okay. Do you want to see how easy that is? That's not bad. So we just go like this. ZIM dot loop. And in round brackets, remember I mentioned the loop can loop through a container. Balls, comma, run a function. Collect the ball that we're operating on. There it is. So will we need an I? Yeah, we'll also need an I. The next parameter is the I, the index of that. And then there we are making the ball, and the adding of the layers would be right here, would go in there like so. Okay, so now we're looping through all the balls and adding the parallax. And down here, we are centering the balls on the stage. So we're still making the balls. And what about this immediates? Do we know the immediates? No, we don't know the immediates until we loop through them all like that. Okay, and we save this and run it. No movement, and then as soon as I come in, movement. Okay, so check that out. No movement. As soon as I come in, it then heads towards the movement. Okay, and that's pretty nice. Excuse me. So we could do it that way. I'll just Control Z. Let's just try something else without the ZIM loop. But isn't that nice? Did you see the loop through the container was quite easy to implement there. So here we are. It's all how it was before. Everything's in place. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. When we make the parallax right here, I'm going to say parallax dot damp equals 1. So that's a damping of 1. Now check this out. We refresh here. Oh, that didn't work. Damp of 1, parallax dot damp of 0. 0, sorry. 1 is no damping at all. Parallax, a damp of 0. So now it's not moving. Okay, because it's the damp is the number that it sort of uses to multiply to get to where it's going. And if you multiply 0, it's just never going to get there. Okay, can you guess what I'm going to do? So that's parallax, a damp of 0. But in here, when we stage.mouse move, we can set the parallax to 0.1 or 0.12 if we're really specific. So there we are. When we mouse move, we'll change the parallax amount. So there's no movement, and we come in here and we get movement. Okay, anyway, that's all really cool. Either way would be fine there, I suppose. Just make sure on this, there's a few things in here that were slightly adjusted when we got to 4.5.1, so you can view the change log on that. Most of these in bits, for instance, are all 4.5.0, so you want to pop on up to the 4.5.1. I'm inventor Dan Zen with some pretty cool parallax here at ZIM. Whoa, yeah! Have a great day. This has been a ZIM Capture. Ciao.